Well, hello everyone. Welcome back. Say, listen, the weather's still dampering us a little bit outside. It really has been raining for about 6 days. So I think it's going to let up. I think we're probably going to be in the clear here, but I took a couple of days here to show you how I sharpen my timber framing chisels. And I want to go over another thing that's pretty important, and that's setting up your worm drive saw, especially if you're going to start cutting larger joints in a project like a timber frame. It's very, very important that this saw is set up correctly. And what I mean by that is that it is square to the base. The blade is exactly square to the base. This is a 10 1/4 inch worm drive saw. It's a Skill Sasquatch worm drive saw. I bought the saw. I felt like I could probably use it for this project. The only other saw I have is a 7 1/4 inch saw, and I felt like the extra cutting depth would help me speed this project along, which I obviously need some help with at this point. If I get this saw set up correctly, I should be able to try and do some true cutting to the line. Drop cutting the tenon shoulders when you're cutting the tenon, drop cutting the side cuts of the tenon instead of doing the kerf cuts and chiseling out with a chisel is always a big time saver. And to do that correctly, you need a square that is very accurate. This is a steric combination square. Use it for woodworking. Extremely accurate. I would suggest getting one of these. Hold her up against the blade. Side light it with a bright light to make sure that there's no light coming through that should not be coming through. I'd like to double check it on the other side just to make sure that the base itself is actually flat, and that looks good. Remember that this situation and this problem is exemplified by the fact that this is a 10 1/4 inch blade. There's a pretty big distance between the base of this saw and the tip of this blade. The higher that is, the more room for error there is, and the more you have to be careful. Make sure the saw is turned off, rotate it about 90 degrees. Check it again. When you're checking to see if the blade is square to the base, make sure that the leg of the square is not touching one of your carbide teeth, because they stick proud of that saw body just a little bit, and that'll throw you off. This saw also has a nut that's designed to actually screw up against the stop, and you can set the 90-degree stop for this base with this little nut, and I've already done that. I don't want to move this because I've already got it square, but that's what you can do. And once you have that nut dialed in and set, crank down the lever that tightens up the base location with a pretty good crank, and you should be pretty good to go. So when I'm done cutting, I'm not going to just drop it on the ground or set it down on the ground very hard or set it on a timber really hard. I'm going to use a little care with this thing so that I'm not always trying to reset the base. With the stop set, it should be pretty quickly to do that, and I will double check, and always double check before I make any cut on this timber frame to make sure it's still exactly square. But if you take a little bit of extra time just to handle it with a little bit of care, it should pay dividends in the long run. A lot of people may think that these marks are accurate on the front of that saw that gives you the delinear markings for the different degrees. I am telling you right now, they are not accurate at all. I've squared this base, and the 0 mark is exactly 2 degrees off. So they could be accurate, but you never know. Don't take it for granted, especially when you're doing some precision work like I'm trying to do. Run-of-the-mill stuff, probably not that big a deal. So next time you have to make some really accurate cuts with your circular saw, whether it's a big 10 1/4 inch one like this, a big 16 inch beam saw, or just a 7 1/4 inch worm drive saw, there's situations where you may have to make a super accurate square cut. And follow these tips. Remember to hold your square off that carbide tooth. Take a little extra time. Square the base to the blade. Don't assume the marks on the saw are accurate. And you can make some really good accurate cuts too. What are you doing? That's nice. Okay, so the weather is going to turn for us. It sounds like it's going to be a little bit nicer. The rain is going to stop. I think I've got a pretty good solution for out where I'm cutting the timbers to kind of keep me out of the blazing sun and maybe even out of the rain. We'll put up a canopy. We'll kind of show you that next time. I think that'll be a pretty good solution. Won't be perfect, but it sure is going to help. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I really appreciate you following the journey, taking time out of your day to watch this stuff. Hopefully you're learning some things. Press that like button if you are. It sure does help the channel. And if you're a new viewer, subscribe, join the journey. Hopefully you can learn a few things from this process. And once we get this barn done, then we've got all kinds of other fun stuff to do. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.